Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is what women need in marriage that is often overlooked and difficult to describe to their partner.
I know all of you are wondering, what could it be? What is so difficult to describe and is overlooked? And when we say it, it's going to make so much sense. Yet you'll see why it is something that is either overlooked or you forget about. It gets deprioritized because we get so focused on managing life.
And I will give it to you. You came up with this term, not the word itself, but in the context of marriage. And I honestly have not been hearing this described really by anyone else. And it really comes from having done and doing so many coaching sessions that you just, you realized it, like this is what it is. And before we tell you what the answer is, it is not really something I think that women are thinking about. But when you sit down and put it all together, you're like, oh, that's what it is. And it is well understood that a successful marriage is one in which the needs of both people are clearly expressed, needs to be understood by the other person, and then those needs are met. Okay, so as you've heard us say, then any upset in a marriage comes from that these needs or these expectations, is another way we say it, they go unmet. And the longer that goes, the more challenging a relationship becomes.
Yeah.
So it is so much about having your needs met. Of course, as I mentioned, expressed and understood. Now, let's go a little bit further, because it's well researched that women in general care more about people and are more nurturing.
Focused on the connection with relationships.
While men care in general more about things and focusing on finding solutions.
Yeah.
So when we bring this to the needs of women in a marriage, we would say once the basic needs are met, like safety, security, and trust, then it becomes more about meeting the emotional needs of a female partner. Okay, so now this is where it leads us to today. And the theme of this episode is that meeting emotional needs, and I realize I'm saying this, even though Jocelyn is like the main driver of this point, I have realized for myself as a partner, like, wow, I really see where this comes into play. And I wanted to say this for the men. It becomes challenging because then it seems like the emotional needs, like for me to you, it can be tricky from the male partner's eyes because it seems like they're ever changing, right? So it's like, okay, these emotional needs, like a moving target. How do I hit it? I feel like I did it one day and now it's something else, and you're back upset at me and you never expressed that and we don't have an agreement. Now I need to repair something. So I could see where that's tricky even for myself. Now, to a degree, this is probably correct. However, the more that we dive into this, the emotional needs are not dramatically different from one moment to like another. So where you, for example, might be saying to me, you have a need to feel more secure, which you did, right? Like 2 years ago, you're like, I feel this drive to have a baby. And then there was like that homesteading feel, right? That nesting, as you said. So you needed more security in that time. So it wasn't like in the very next moment, you're like, well, I also need wild adventure and thrill. So
those would be confusing back to back. Right.
Yeah, it's not like dramatic like that. So if you get down to it, the changing need will likely be in the same category of security. So here comes the tricky thing. It's how the need of security gets expressed and met will be slightly different. And this is where we get to this critical skill you are calling, I won't even take credit, of emotional attunement.
Yes. And I didn't invent that term, by the way, right? It exists in many different forms of literature and things that you can read. However, you're right. A lot of people don't talk about it. We hear people define emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, right? There's a lot of conversation around emotion. And emotional attunement, to define it, is the ability to recognize and respond to each other's emotional state. And to be clear, this goes both ways. It's not that just women need it and men don't. Men also do. We just happen to be doing this episode for women, but remember, this always goes both ways. Now, this emotional attunement isn't that you're supposed to be guessing how the other person feels. We're not saying that you're supposed to just pick up all the clues and your partner never communicates how they're feeling. But emotional attunement is knowing the other person. It is responding in helpful ways. And
let me cue the men in here real quick, because I have a sports analogy. It's going to be a football analogy.
Okay.
So when we talk about emotional attunement, also think of the intuition and anticipation of the defensive position of a safety. Okay, so when you think emotional attunement, I want you to also think, okay, anticipation and intuition. But in this case, it's not intuition from the decisions that you want to make for yourself. It's intuition about the emotional need of your partner. So just like a safety in football, they are much further back from the line of scrimmage and where the offense is. It gives them a unique and broader perspective on how the play is developing. And so a really good safety like Deion Sanders, which is one that I mentioned in a coaching session last week, he was so good. And you could also say Wayne Gretzky. I said this on the call too. Wayne Gretzky being the best hockey player of all time. They asked him why he was so good. And he said, well, he went to where the puck was not. Right. So it goes to show that in sports, it was their anticipation. They're seeing the play develop, and then they put themselves in the place that was going to be needed from that anticipation and intuition when it wasn't right in that moment. They anticipated and would make themselves available to where they would need to be in the short, distant future.
I love that term, that word availability. Like being available to our partner is such a big point of attunement. And before I give some clear steps of what it would look like to be attuned in real life, let me first define and give you examples, because it'll make so much sense when it's missing, when you aren't being emotionally attuned to each other. So let's say your partner shares something that they're struggling with, and it doesn't even have to be related to the relationship. It would be responding with something insensitive or dismissing, like, hey, it's really not that big of a deal, or you wouldn't have this problem if you just blank. That also could be especially the case if it is about you, right? So it might be easier if they are talking about work or a family member, but if it's about you and you instead kind of diminish it, even though it's something they're struggling with in the relationship. Second, let's say they seem overwhelmed. Maybe they're being even a little bit short and snappy. Being out of attunement, not attuned, you would react to them. Tell them to stop being that way, kind of feed the fire, make it worse. Now you're spiraling and arguing when your partner was overwhelmed and ultimately they needed something. And again, we'll go to some very clear steps to strengthen this in your relationship. Another would be making a joke or even being distracted when they're sharing something that's on their mind or something that they're feeling, something they've been thinking about and is important to them. So, of course, making a joke at the wrong time, being distracted on your phone. Oh, wait, I was seeing a play on this screen. What were you saying again? Right, that's not being emotionally attuned or available. And then another would be isolating them, leaving them when they're clearly distressed or hurt. And again, that could be about your relationship or something not related to the two of you. But if we take what our partner is saying personally, or we don't like the way they're expressing it, we're uncomfortable with their emotion, and we either react to it or isolate them, that is not being emotionally attuned. And
I would take this a little bit further, because I have the benefit of being able to look at our notes here.
Yes.
And I can look at all of the examples you just gave. Now, this is why it becomes tricky, I think, because if I look at any of the action that was taken, for example, the first one was me saying it's not that big of a deal. So does that mean that that statement is always the wrong statement? Well, no. But in a given situation, if I'm not attuned to the situation, then saying it's not that big of a deal is going to feel very invalidating and not supportive to my partner. But I could be attuned, and I could have a sense of this topic and let's say the emotional state you were in prior, I could get a sense of just how much this is impacting you. And in a different scenario, the same thing could be happening. And I could be really attuned to you and say, hey, you know what? It's just not, this isn't that big of a deal. And it might actually land for you as, oh yeah, you're right. So I think that's why I'll just say us men can get stuck, is because, well, I can say this one time and now it doesn't meet a need and then it does another time. So that's where we get lost, and this is so complex. I don't know how to meet your need. You just told me to do this last week and now I'm trying to do the same thing.
One day you want a hug, now you're wanting me to listen, now you want advice. Which one do you want?
Yeah, and it really takes this. I'll do one more example. The joke and it's like, oh, well, is using humor when our partner is feeling distressed, is that always the wrong thing to do? Well, no. But as we go into this, I'm not sure we're going to be able to give it 100%, because attunement really is about being present
in the moment.
It's about knowing your partner. It's about intuiting the emotional state that they're in, probably also knowing their personality and what works best for them, the levels of support.
That's true.
And again, me saying a joke might be the thing that you need in a certain circumstance, but again, would feel isolating or feel disrespectful, let's say, in a different situation.
Yes.
So again, it's not about the action, but your action needs to be adjusted based on how attuned you are.
And it takes time to get to know a person, and you're not going to always get it right too. But let's talk about some ways you can strengthen your emotional attunement in the relationship. So number one, you got to pay attention. So you talked about being present, which a lot of people aren't. We're distracted. We're busy. We're trying to do 3 things at once, even though our partner's sharing something. We're in a hurry, got to go. So you actually do have to be present and pay attention, and especially nonverbal cues, right? We talk a lot about communication, and of course, what we are saying or writing to each other is a big part of communication, but we all know that nonverbal communication is a huge part of the way we understand each other. And so you have to be present to them. Okay, how does their face look? Oh, they seem to be hurrying more. Oh, their shoulders are slumped down, so maybe they look discouraged. Or they seem stressed because they're moving really fast. Maybe their eyes actually have tears starting to well up.
I was just going to say that, yeah, that's point where it's a little misty. You can just see there's like a different sort of, not a glaze, right? But you can see that there's moisture building. And if you're not paying attention and looking at them to tell that they're on the verge of tears, and that's how important this is, that's going to be a great signal for me on what action's going to be most attuned, versus if I make a joke at this moment in time when my partner their eyes are misty, probably not going to be the best action for me to take.
And realizing that, if they look closed, like their body, and there's so many studies that talk about this. So if arms are crossed, if they're slumped down, if their legs are crossed and they look kind of closed off, that's probably not the time to crack the joke or to use logic, because that body language is displaying that they don't feel safe right then. Not because you're not safe, but because of whatever they're dealing with.
Whereas, can I add something to that?
Sure, yeah.
I like to look for opportunities to break the physical touch barrier, which was something I really had to learn, because from like a love language perspective, I was always very low on physical touch. I worked on that over the years, and now I try to do a better job of providing physical touch for you, especially in those times when, like we're describing here.
Yeah.
But there are brief moments early on when, for example, you're initially really struck or impacted by something, that your nonverbal cues are going to let me know that physical touch is probably not the right move in this very moment.
Yeah, I need to talk first.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's going to be a few other things before, like a hug or just some sort of embrace. Again, breaking that physical touch barrier is going to be more of the adequate and appropriate response, but it's not going to be the first one.
Yes. So paying attention to those nonverbal cues, huge. Next, you actually have to get interested. You have to get curious rather than taking things personally. And we cannot emphasize this enough, because especially if it is about you or something that involves you, it's so easy to take their frustration, take their sadness, take their anger, whatever emotion is coming up for them, take it personally, and then you have a reaction to their reaction, which is such a big part of why conflict can begin from something that could be a connecting conversation. So staying interested, staying curious, and then actively listening. So much of this is just, to introduce a different term, holding space. You don't even need to fix it, especially if someone is in the moment of distress, stress, overwhelm, sadness. They don't need more said. And in fact, they a lot of times need to kind of empty out, vent, say it. And so if you can just hold space, just be there, be present, and actively listen to them, show them that you are listening. That is often the solution of what they need. And then when they do take a pause, they take a breath. If you come in and you're not attuned, and you do come in with like a quick fix or a joke or something that doesn't work for their personality or what you think would actually support them, that can only make it worse. So what's usually needed is empathy first. They don't need a solution right away. They don't need to feel better right away. They need to just have someone empathize with them.
I mean, that's a huge takeaway, especially for the men listening. I do think we subconsciously try to help you not feel what you're feeling.
Yeah, just get past it.
As a way to kind of find a solution to the problem. And it's just really, I don't really have a number. It's probably not a 50-50 thing, but let's call it 50-50 and try it out. And then you can message us back and tell us if it's like 80-20 or a different ratio. But most of the time, I think I've found that when I've tried to change how you feel or your state, it's always met with, I don't want to say defensiveness. It's just met with, well, it's just not what you needed.
Yeah.
And then it is like, I'm not accepting where you're at. It might lead to, well, you're not really listening or hearing me. You don't feel validated. So I think in a very real way, that's a key takeaway from this podcast. I don't, I have to like let you be in some sad emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we all build emotional intelligence also, is by accepting how we feel and even understanding and being with how we feel ourselves. And you can support your partner in that growth by not trying to change them or get them to move, past that state. I know it's difficult because, especially if it's about you as a partner, you want to move past the uncomfort of disappointing them. And so, you don't have to feel that way. Let's just move on. Let's just have a good day. It's not that big of a deal. Can't you just let it go? So all of that, rather than just like letting our partners be with it. And there's a lot of connection that can happen in those moments too.
So now that you're offering empathy, you're validating them, you can ask what would have them feel supported right now. You don't have to like perfectly understand. Let's say your partner lost someone they love. Maybe you haven't ever lost anyone or as close. And so you actually don't know what it's like to be in that position, and you don't know what they need because you haven't experienced it. You can ask them, hey, what would have you feel supported right now? Let's say they're really overwhelmed with something in their profession or their career, and you don't completely understand why it's so overwhelming because you've not been in the same position or you don't have the same mentality as them with that. Okay, you don't have to be the same as them, but you can ask them, what would have you feel supported right now? That question is always a great go-to. And then after that, being emotionally attuned is checking in on them from time to time, right? So it's not just that one-time conversation, especially if it's something they're, really deal with. Like, so for me, when I've struggled with certain family relationships that can on and off be challenging, man, it means so much to me, not just when you listen to me that one time, but when you then check in on me later that day or the next day and, just have me know you're thinking about me. So those check-ins go a really long way. Now, I do think it's worth going into in a moment why this can be missing for so many people, but we know that a lot of you listen to these episodes and then you're like, oh my gosh, we have to implement this. How do we implement this? I want to make sure that we don't forget about it. So 2 resources that are just musts right now. Number 1, our 30-day couples challenge is always a great go-to. If you have not done it, it's just a must. You got to read the testimonials. You have to see why men and women love it. So go to mycoupleschallenge.com. That's also going to be linked in the show notes. That starts on the 1st of this coming month. So get signed up before it starts. And then second is our newest guide, the steps to rebuild a marriage. So this provides you the honest and constructive conversations needed to start a new chapter together. You will love the prompts that you can either write to each other, you can talk about, and that you can do some self-reflecting on first to start a new chapter, to draw a line in the sand, to make new commitments to each other. Very practical. So that link is also in the show notes, but it's thecouplesexperience.com/rebuild. So you can go ahead and read all the details for that. But those are 2 great ways to take these things and put them into practice and action in your relationship.
Yeah, so let's bring this to a summary and a close by talking a little bit about why this skill, I'll call it, of attunement is missing for many people.
Yeah.
The first one being that, well, your parents weren't attuned to you. And so this goes into a lot of the attachment style theories between avoidant and anxious, or why someone would be in a secure attachment style because your parents were actually attuned.
Exactly. Right. So how did your parents treat you when you were upset? You know, did you get scolded? Did you get told, stop crying? Did you get, told to go to timeout? When really, if you see so much of the new parenting wisdom, it's about teaching our children to co-regulate. They don't learn by being told they're wrong for how they're feeling. They learn by watching you model and also you helping them co-regulate. So definitely how we experienced this or didn't experience it growing up can affect it. But it doesn't mean that even if your parents weren't attuned to you and they didn't know how to support you in those times, it doesn't mean you can't learn it now. This is 100% something that you can strengthen within yourself now just by choosing it. Now, the second reason that it can be missing in a marriage for a person is because you've become resentful and distant from things either that have been unrepaired or they have gone unresolved. And so when we're living with that, it can cause us to close off our hearts, to be less empathetic, because there can be kind of so much pain or, again, resentment, to use that term again, from me having expressed so much what I need or how I'm feeling, and you don't understand, and then you're not meeting it. You don't even try to meet it. So we can close our hearts to protect ourselves. Again, it is possible to open your hearts back up again, to make those changes, to start a new chapter. So that's why we have the Rebuild a Marriage Guide. We don't want you to think this is a place that you're stuck with that resentment, but that's a reason that we can not be attuned to our partner.
Well, because if you feel like your needs are not getting met, it's difficult to take the steps and put in the effort to meet your partner's needs.
True. Or even just being like present to them, as opposed to kind of being more checked out, not paying attention.
Yeah.
So then another reason that it can be missing for people is you don't even validate your own experiences. So if you aren't aware of how you're feeling or what you're doing, or even give your emotions the time of day, because maybe you've been conditioned to just go, get up, go for the grind, get a workout in, go to the gym, and then go to work and then come home and clean. And you've just become more on autopilot and you don't even check in on yourself. So if you don't care about your own emotional state, then it's hard, of course, to care about your partner's. So this has to be a priority too, to actually be checking in on yourself, to be taking care of yourself, to validate your own feelings, which is very hard for a lot of men, depending on the upbringing they had and whatever culture as well, and the context of, how they were told emotions should be handled. So there could be many other reasons, but those are some of the big ones. But the overarching thing we want you to get from this is that this absolutely is a learnable skill. It's something you can strengthen. It's never too late. It just takes the willingness to say, yes, I do want to work on being more emotionally attuned to you. And re-listen to those steps for how we laid them out and practice them. It is actually just like strengthening an arm muscle. You actually have to practice it and get it wrong and then get it right and then mess up a little bit and then try again to be able to get better at it. But this is deep down one of, if not the top need that women have. And when they say they want to feel more connected, this is often what they mean. And they don't usually have this description or this term. So we hope that this bridges some communication between the two of you and gives you even more language to talk about what you're looking for. Again, it goes both ways. It's not just for women. Men also want to feel their partner is attuned to them. We will come with another episode covering a need for men. So always stay tuned, right? We're not biased for the women. There's going to be an episode coming for the men as well. But we are grateful for you listening. If you enjoy our show, make sure you subscribe. And it means so much to us if you would give us 5 stars on whichever platform that you're listening on. And then make sure you take advantage of our resources like our Steps to Rebuild a Marriage Guide and our 30-Day Couples Challenge, which are linked in the show notes. But we love you guys, and we will talk to you on the next episode.